Let's go to Professor Di.
Okay, thank you, Simon. It's my great pleasure to come to Malaysia to participate in this roundtable and have a discussion with our panelists on the China Plus One issue. I have 3 points to make in these 5 minutes. First is about the East Asia development model and the so-called China Plus One. As we all know, since 1970s, started from Japan, South Korea, Chinese Taiwan, and somebody else, some other cities. Gradually, this region benefited from a developing model by exporting manufacturing products to both the United States and Europe. And this export-oriented developing model really worked in the past half century. But the problem is the first terms of President Donald Trump, first term presidency, his trade policy, raising tariff against major trade partners, especially focused on China. What he did in his first term ended the globalization, as well as the China-U.S. spatial economic relation. Some people term it as Chimerica. But nowadays, we are facing his second presidency. And since what he did in early April 2nd, the so-called Liberation Day, what he did since then is ending the development model of exporting to the U.S., as well as ending the so-called China Plus One, because his so-called reciprocal tariff is eliminating the space of tariff arbitrage. So that's why last week I read a report on Financial Times indicating that Vietnam, instead of anybody else, may be the major or primary victim of the trade war of his second presidency. Okay. And then the second point is about the changing geopolitical and geoeconomic situation. So the second term of Donald Trump seems very clear that he is trying to bring the United States back from the globe to North America, which means U.S. is retreating from the global hegemon to a North America empire. Actually, he's trying to fetch land from his neighbors in North America. And he, according to some resources, he's serious about that. It's not a joke. So, which means that people here today, especially on the Asia and the Europe continent, including Southeast Asia, we are going to face a new reality, a new normal, that geopolitically and geoeconomically, the absence of the United States or reluctance of the United States involving in the affairs of the continent. Yeah. So, U.S. cabinet members, like Finance Secretary Bessent and his economic advisor, Stephen Miran, they suggested that the United States should work together with its allies and all various partners to isolate China from the global supply chain. But ironically, what they say and what they propose does not matter that much. It's only President Donald Trump himself could define what is American first really means. Yeah. So his priority, his personal priority, remains securing trillions of dollars of revenue from the tariff to finance his tax cut domestically. That's his major concern. So hence, those who expect that they could appease in the United States in the negotiation of the tariff at the cost of China, at the cost of their relationship with China, could result in a relatively lower tariff from the United States so that they continue to have the China plus one strategy. I believe that kind of perspective, that kind of...
I ask this question because in the Asian crisis, China voluntarily held their currency stable, helped us.
Thank you, Simon. It's a very good question and a very challenging question for me. First of all, I should say I personally reject a term which is quite prevalent recently in the media, overcapacity. Because anybody who learned serious economics, anybody who really understands the market mechanism, you will see the so-called overcapacity is a normal situation. Yeah. So, which means a mature market need overcapacity, which means you will squeeze out the unproductive capacity. That's how the market improves its capability. If we demand that the whole world market is always the market supply and the demand is equal, then it's not a market economy. It's called a planned economy. Okay, that's number one. Number two, on China's capacity in some of the sectors like solar panels, windmills, electronic vehicles, and steel, we can see the real problem is the frozen or stagnation of the global aggregated demand instead of the capability to produce. Because if you look at the whole world, how about the 2030 peak of the global carbon emission? If the whole human being are serious about that kind of goals, then the products that just now I mentioned is not overcapacity at all. Because if you look at the whole world demand, the potential demand to meet the 2030 or 2050 zero carbon, then we should produce more solar panels. Okay. Then the third perspective is echoing what Zheng Dong just now said, is about how to stimulate the global demand. Even when the United States are retreating from the global market and refusing to be the buyer of the last resort. The real problem is redistribution of wealth among the rich and poor, among the rich nations and poor nations. We should improve the governance of the global economic system. We should restructure it, improve it, so that the poor people who potentially want to consume more products to have the cash flow to spend. Later on, I will talk a little bit about how Chinese government is recently thinking about stimulating its domestic demand. Okay, I will stop here.
No, please, go on. Okay, go on that, please.
That's a big story. That's what we are recently discussing about and debating about domestically. We all know that China in the past several years, we have already eliminated extreme poverty, doing a lot of efforts. But if you look at the structure of the wealth distribution in China, it's still not a typical middle-class majority society. Overwhelming majority of people occupies only a relatively small portion of the wealth and cash flow. So I will not go into the detailed numbers. So then people have different proposals from different political, economic perspective. Some people say, okay, we should raise the portion of the social welfare, especially encouraging young people to give birth to new babies. Because each new baby come to the world, the family will have to spend a lot of money on various issues, including cars, apartments, you name it. Okay, that's one solution. At its peak, back in 1960s, every year there were 28 million, averagely, 28 million Chinese new babies come to the world. But today, it's only more than 8 million, which means every year the gap is huge, and the gap is going to expand in the coming future. So help stimulate the new birth rate. It's very crucial for the stimulation of the consumption. And another perspective is about the social welfare gap between the urban and the rural areas. We all know Chinese baby boomer happened in 1960s. And overwhelming majority of those people lived in the countryside when they were birth. Today, there were around 170 million old people in the rural area. And every month, what they can get from the pension fund is around, averagely, 220 Chinese yuan. Not dollar. We're not discussing about dollar. 220 Chinese yuan. That means they could hardly live a decent life, even if they have their own land and farmhouse. So we are discussing about raising that ratio to a substantial raising, so that they can, not really expecting them to spend, because older people always save money, even if you give them more. What we do is to encourage them to retreat from the low-level labor-intensive market, so that young people in the labor-intensive market, their income could grow dramatically. And if that happens, yes, I believe it will benefit a lot. Okay.
Thank you very much. Those are very